I'm Joanne Wilson, and this is Positively Gotham Gal. Real, honest, and meaningful conversations with women entrepreneurs about their approach to life, business, and everything in between.
So we're just going to chat. I mean, I love BAM and I've been to BAM, but your career is fascinating. How did you start in the NFL, which is like something everyone, who loves sports hopes they land?
It was completely random. So I studied film in college
At
and
Northwestern?
yeah, at Northwestern. And my end of my junior year, I decided to change my major to English.
Because,
I have no idea why. It was just, I kind of got, I think, burned out with film. And I wanted to change, and I had enough credits where I could do that. So I changed to English. And the reason I got the NFL Films job was because they would not interview film majors. They would only interview English majors.
that's
And
hilarious.
so,
Did they come to your campus?
yeah. So Steve Sable, who started NFL Films, only recruited from like Northwestern, Notre Dame, USC, UCLA, and University of Pennsylvania.
Fascinating. Okay.
That was it. And he would only interview English majors because he felt he could teach people how to make a film, but he couldn't teach people how to tell a story. So I was like, okay, I'm going to interview for this job. I know nothing about football. I went to the library and took out two books about football. And it turned out the test they gave me was based off of one of the books I bought.
Oh my God. And what was the book?
It was just like a big coffee table book with like the best players from all the years. And it was a picture test.
Hilarious. So you grew up with no sports in your house, I guess, or no football?
I grew up with football, but I didn't like it. I found it boring. It was just something my dad watched.
And violent.
Yeah, and violent. And then suddenly it was like this job. So yeah, I took the test. I aced it. I wrote two essays, and I got the job.
That's such a great story. And where did you grow up?
I grew up primarily in Delaware.
Got it. And so where is NFL? Where are they located? New York?
They're in South Jersey. So, when I left Northwestern, I ended up essentially moving back home. I was like an hour away from my parents. So they were very happy to have me back. I'm an only child.
Got it, got it. And then you stayed there, and then you sort of stayed in the production end, and going into you stuck with film.
Yeah. So I was at NFL Films for 3 years. And it was a tough job being a young woman in a very male dominated organization.
I am sure.
And I was like one of two Black women. And they opened the NFL Network in about 2005. And I figured out they were paying more to do less work at the NFL Network, which was in LA. So I just called the folks at the in the LA office and I said, if I moved to LA, would you hire me to edit? And they said, yeah. So I went from being a producer making whole films and pieces for like 28,000 a year to making $60 an hour editing nights and weekends, and it allowed me during the day to work at like an agency. So I was like an assistant to an agent learning Hollywood, and at night I'd edit football stuff for television.
Crazy. So were you living in Los Angeles?
Yeah, so I moved to LA to the West Side. At the time, you could still get an apartment for like 900 a month.
Where'd you live on the West Side?
I live near Sony Studios, like Pico, at like Venice and Overland area. And I am such an East Coaster. I liked having the ability to walk to work because NFL Network was like 4 blocks away. So I drive to the agency job, and then the evenings I'd just walk over.
Yeah, I mean, I will say West Hollywood's probably the most walkable.
Yeah.
Although Silver Lake is pretty cool, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's an ever-changing city for sure.
Yeah.
And so you left and you went to BAM. So were you recruited for BAM?
Um, so I left LA and was I left LA because I was working for a production company that did theater and film, and they moved me to New York. So I was working for this family in LA that was their entire life was funded by their AIG stock. So you know how that story ends in 2008.
Not pretty.
Yeah. So I was in New York now with no job because it disappeared with the stock. And my grandmother was in Westchester County and she had Parkinson's and was transitioning to needing like full-time care. And I'm such a grandma's girl. So I wanted to figure out how to still have a career, but also be able to take care of her. So I literally Googled film Westchester County and I found this art house cinema, Jacob Burns in Pleasantville. And it had Janet Maslin on the board, Jonathan Demme, Ron Howard, Steven Spielberg. And I was like, okay, I've never programmed film, like curated series, but at least this is still in the industry. I'm just going to apply. And they hired me and I had a mensch of a boss who just saw that I could kind of do anything if I put my mind to it. And he's like, if you want to program films, program films.
That's amazing. So we spent almost 5 years in Chappaqua.
Oh, yeah.
When our kids were little. I mean, we called our time in purgatory, but regardless, we're city people. We
Yeah.
did go there. And as we were leaving this Jacob Burns Center, and we have really good friends up there, and most of
Yeah.
them are now in the city because their kids are older. And it was literally this oasis in the middle of
Yeah.
Westchester County. And the films were great, and the conversations were great. And,
Hmm.
um, I mean, it was an amazing hub.
It was. And everything that I bring to BAM, I learned there, in terms of like having community and engagement and connection with the folks who live around you as the foundation of what you do. So it wasn't for me so much about the films as much as me using the films and the programming to connect with people. And then when I got the BAM job, I was like, okay, I'm just going to do this now in Brooklyn as opposed to Pleasantville.
That's super cool. But then Sundance came along.
Yeah. Sundance gave me a call first to see if they could partner with BAM. And this was in the pandemic when they were thinking about doing the online festival, but then also having these like satellite screens where they could do distanced in-person screenings, and they wanted BAM to be the spot for it.
Hmm.
And then the conversations kind of turned into, "Don't you want to work with us?" And I was like, "Oh." And it did come at a right time for me. I was a little, honestly, kind of burned out, especially in a performing arts institution with so much of what we were doing was in person. And we didn't have the ability to just as seamlessly, transition to the digital space in the same way that Sundance was able to. And so suddenly I found myself producing an online festival.
Well, I mean, it's gone through hell over there, Sundance. But I have to say, I kind of like watching them at home.
I do think it's the future. For some films, I still very much believe in the in-person theatrical experience completely. Yeah.
No doubt. I mean, listen, I'm a film lover of
Yeah.
films, and I love going to the movie. But I guess what I liked about watching Sundance at home is that I could literally watch 9 movies in a day
Yeah.
and be fine.
Yeah.
Whereas there, you do have to move around from theater to theater. It's not that easy. And there's something. I talked to plenty of people over at Sundance during the pandemic, and how do you take that business and what's the next wave of that business? I mean, Sundance is still Sundance,
Yeah.
and all these young up and coming people that want to sell their films, but can't they live on Sundance's site in some way that highlights them regardless of being sold. I mean,
Yeah.
you know a lot more than I know about the industry, but there are so many nuances about titles and where people can hang and what you can do. And so they seem to be going through a very tough time.
Yeah, and I think Joanna will figure it out. I will say what I experienced was younger audiences and folks very passionate about independent film really enjoyed the online experience for exactly what you just said. They saw more films.
Hmm.
And I think festivals have to grapple with what their purpose is. Is it to get as many people as possible to watch a lot of films? Or is it people coming together in the same space? And I think for the filmmakers, they get a lot, like you said, from being on the ground and meeting distributors, and, you know, a lot of next projects are even sold in that moment, let alone the project that they're featuring. But I think for the art house cinema community, it's important for us to create a pipeline of people for this work. And if people can see a lot of the films, as opposed to like the 3 or 4 you might end up seeing if you were actually there, you have more people who can be advocates and champions for those films when they finally come to your local cinema.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, I love when I see these films finally make its way into the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Um, but they make you think differently. I mean, even when you see so many films a day and you realize, oh, we have a theme going here, right?
Yeah.
These are what filmmakers are being affected by, be it the pandemic, be it um, racial injustice,
Yeah.
be it inequity. And so there's something, particularly as more and more documentaries are being made,
Hmm.
there's something very, very cool about that.
Yeah.
So you left. You
Yeah.
went back to BAM. You're now the president of BAM. You've
Yeah.
had all this, yeah, you have all this great experience, and you came sort of at the end of like the pandemic situation,
Yeah.
kind of.
Hmm.
And so, what's it like to come back? And how is, maybe you can talk a little bit about BAM, because I think you do so many things at BAM that I think people are like, do you do just theater? Are there films? Are there community? Like, there's so many different arms of BAM, and Brooklyn has had such a changing landscape
Yeah.
in the last decade, and ability to reach out to so many more people that want to engage with their community. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think the 18 months at Sundance was actually a lot of time for me to like think and reflect on my BAM experience. Because even though I think my first tour of duty at BAM, I was here for 3.5 years, and a lot happened in that time. So it gave me time to process. And I missed the place. I missed the people. I missed being a part of an institution that had this long history, however you want to look at it, good or bad. We're the oldest continuously operating performing arts institution in the country. Um, where else can you go and say, I'm the president of an institution that Frederick Douglass spoke at? That's fantastic.
Not many.
Not many, So I was really missing that. And since I've been back, it's been really great. I mean, a lot of folks were worried about, will the staff see me as a leader, or are they going to just kind of, would they look at me still as a peer? How would that come across? And I think they really embraced me in this role, from security and facilities to the folks in the C-suite. And I think a lot of that was because I was always a leader, even if I wasn't the president.
That's a very good point, right? Because I know people that have grown up in a business, right? And certainly now, like people in their, 20s, it's so difficult. You move back and forth and all over the place. And what's interesting about that is that as you grow up, sometimes nobody can ever look at you at the top because you came from below, right? And sometimes it's good to leave to come back in
Mhm.
order to grab that job. But
Mhm.
if you have a leadership type personality, everyone is probably thrilled that you came back.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the reason why I'm back is because they wanted me back. The board, the search committee spoke to staff and said, "What are you looking for in a future leader?" And what I'm told, it was if they didn't say my name outright, they were describing someone similar to how I showed up. And I think the way that I've always showed up has been very authentic, very direct. I've never really been afraid to be vulnerable in front of staff. And I think a lot of that I learned from my mother. She was always a leader, and she was head of operations for like a credit card division of a bank. And I just kind of saw how she worked with her teams and how she showed up. And it was this always caring, open, strong. People knew where they stood with her. And I just always emulated that.
I love that because particularly today, there's all this conversation about we can't find employees, we can't find employees. And I think one of the reasons, and I could be crazy, is that nobody feels that their work for their where they're hanging their hat cares about them
Hmm.
or is taking care of them
Hmm.
or they have a community there.
Hmm.
And because of that, there's no loyalty. And I think that if you can create an environment where people feel safe and taken care of, and that they understand that you have a life outside of the job and a family, it changes everything.
Completely. When I came in, I told them that the values that I'm bringing to BAM and this leadership position is one about it's care, it's equity, and it's belonging. I really want BAM to be a home for everyone who comes here. And we have the our vision statement, our mission statement, which is BAM is the home for adventurous artists, audiences, and ideas. And for me, I've been really focused on that home aspect and how it can be a home for all of our constituents. And to what you were saying earlier, we do everything, you know. And so that's a really, it's important that we continue to serve all of those communities, but there needs to be one thing that pulls them all together. And for me, that's how they are treated and the experience they have from the moment they decide to come to BAM.
Do you think that now more than ever that cultural institutions are a lifeline for New York City?
Yeah, completely. I mean, in February 2020, yeah, an artist friend of mine, Jatavia Gary, had a show at the Paula Cooper Gallery, and she had a piece that's a Saida Hartman quote that says, "Care is the antidote to violence."
I love that.
And that has just, you know, been something I've returned to time and time again because so much of what we experience is violent. What we went through in the pandemic, even just prior to the pandemic, I don't know about you, but I was burnt out. I was so tired.
I think everybody was.
So much so. In some ways, I feel like we collectively manifested the pandemic because we all just wanted to stay in our house for a little bit because we were so tired.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I was literally talking about with this someone last night, which is what the pandemic did is it took everyone out of that rat race.
Yeah,
And I think that is also why we're in a different place. I mean, America is a rat race,
yeah,
and New York is a really big rat race.
completely.
And so every people said to themselves, is this really what I want to do with my life? Do I want to run like this at this level?
Yeah,
And what is the balance between the life I want to live and the work that I want to do. And I think that is um, the post pandemic is still trying to figure that out.
And I sometimes I feel like we haven't fully learned the lessons. So, to answer your question, that's what I'm trying to figure out now for BAM, because I can't tell you, I feel like we're doing more now, right? I feel like I'm getting more invites than I got pre-pandemic. And I'm also noticing that there's kind of this inconsistency in terms of what we show up for and what we don't. So some things like everyone is at, and other things, you can only get like 3 or 4 people. So part of me feels like people are overwhelmed. We're overwhelmed by the amount of activity because we're out of training.
For sure.
And then
Yeah.
and then also I think some of us are still not ready to be out there in that way. And I would love us to figure out what that balance is for the sake of staff. And then also for our artists. I think we were doing way too much, and I think we're in jeopardy of repeating that.
The burnout.
Yeah.
Well, I talked to a company this week. They are a production company. I mean, they
Hmm.
make websites. I love the fact that there were all these women building these things because that is new. That was not 10 years ago.
Agree.
But their conversation was great. They're like, listen, we only work 4 days a week. Come to the office. We're very flexible. Everyone has full health care, and we've made a commitment that we all have lives. And I was like, wow, that's great. I mean, I even still remember like as a young adult going to Europe and thinking, there's something here. Now, of course, we've all found it's smoke and mirrors, but regardless, there is something very, and it still is like when you go to Europe, you don't feel that craze
Yeah.
that you can feel in our cities.
Yeah.
And it takes it down a level. And, it'll be interesting to see where we all are in another couple of years.
Yeah. And I think the challenge that I have with the nature of what we do, production, um, it's there's an inequity in terms of that work-life balance. For
Right.
production teams or crews, they're here for our security and facilities. When I say have a good weekend, they're not having a weekend. Their weekend might be Tuesday and Wednesday, or so that's what I'm also trying to figure out is how to take care of those people who are doing jobs in which it can't be this 4-day work week type
Right.
thing. Yeah.
Right. Totally. I get that. I mean,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I mean, I work jobs where my weekends were in the middle of the week or, it was 2 random days.
Yeah.
So you didn't really get to relax,
Exactly.
because by the time you got your shit together you're back to work again.
Yeah.
And that's a tough one. What are you planning going forward, as you think about the shaping a more an equitable city? Like, is that something that is a guiding light at BAM as you're starting to think about what type of films or theater or events or cultural connection and all the things that you do over there?
Yeah. I mean, this is, in some ways, we started this work pre-pandemic. We did a very, I would say, radical anti-oppression program here at BAM prior to the pandemic. So, in some ways, when the uprisings happened, it felt like the entire country was finally having the conversation we'd been having internally for some time. And I think now we're in this point of figuring out how to put all of those values and those ideas into our process, right? How do we actually operationalize diversity, equity, and inclusion? And so when I was talking about the values of equity, care, and belonging, those need to be values that everyone in the organization is thinking about as they're planning their work. So that could mean from the programming side, okay, I want to do this project with this artist. Now, what does this mean for staff? What does it mean, for the security team? What does it mean for general management, etc.? What does it mean for the artists and what does it mean for the audience? Like, how do we make sure all people feel the care, that there is equity in terms of where we in what we invest in and what we might cut in order to balance? Um, and I've been thinking a lot about, holistic programming. I think for some time with BAM, we've kind of just prioritized the main stage. So we've prioritized theater and dance, etc. And even when I started here in the film program, a lot of the conversation was around how I can get the film audiences into our live performance spaces. And I always felt like that wasn't my job, because if you're coming to BAM, anything you come to is valuable. So if you decide you're only coming here to see films, that's fine. If you figure out that, oh, you want to go see this other show, it shouldn't be, me trying to sell you on that because, oh, you're Black, so you came to this thing, come to this Black program, or you're a woman, you're come to this. It should be more us thinking about holistic programs. So if you come in the door for this film, you already know what other programs are happening in other genres that are in that same space, that are a part of that larger series. So that's a lot of what we're thinking about now, as opposed to just having just a film series. How does that film series cross over and have humanities elements, community elements, live performance elements? Um, and also, when I started in 2017 running the film program, that was around the time that everyone was talking about Oscars So White. And I was troubled a little bit with that conversation because I felt like the conversation was focusing on scarcity as opposed to abundance. I felt that people, what that was being distilled to was, oh, Black and brown people and women are not in film, as opposed to they are there. We're ignoring the ones that are there and we're not giving them more opportunities, right?
True.
So I took our curated program, our repertory film program, and just said this program is going to focus on work by and featuring Black and brown and women storytellers. And that was pretty aggressive for one of the top film programs in the city to say we're essentially not going to be doing retrospectives of white male filmmakers from
Yeah,
here on out. And audiences loved it. They
I'm
responded,
sure they did.
and they came out, and we really differentiated ourselves, and in a lot of ways paved the way for other film programs in town to do more in those spaces. And we did that all pre-pandemic. That was all prior to the uprisings. And now that we're on the other side of that, what I'm finding is that that audience is also looking for new films that fit that vein. So
Right.
our cinema is like one of the most successful for Tar, the film Tar. We're doing better than most other cinemas in the country. The other side of that, though, is now that this audience is so discerning, they're not coming out for those traditional, very male films.
Yes. It's such a strange time that we've ignored 50% of the population,
Yeah.
right? We've ignored Black and brown founders, creators, what have you not. And all of a sudden, there has been this uprising in the post pandemic world because of what went on during the pandemic to actually realize, wait a second, these, what they're doing is amazing and they've been under the radar. And now we're going to highlight them. And, I hear from young white men how hard it is for them, right?
Mm,
It's changing. And I don't feel bad for them,
mm-mm.
but it is, no, not at all, because now they actually have to compete against others. And we need to get to a point where everyone is competing for that prize, regardless of the way they look or feel. And the only way to do it is to lean heavily on the other side before we get it. And
Yeah,
it's hard.
I think it's a bit of one reparation and then it'll correct itself. I also think that like the ones that were complaining were mediocre to begin with. I don't think that any
I happen to agree with that. I think if you're really good, you're gonna do just freaking fine.
you're fine.
100%. I mean, but, it is, I mean, even like we, my husband had started this nonprofit, CSNYC, and the first uh, programs were opened at Washington Irving High School.
Mm.
And what was happening is that it was skewed towards men, right? And what they learned is if you don't go after men for these seats in the school and just go after women, you end up with a 50-50 mix.
Yeah, well, so what I found and was so surprised by, but then, it is what it is. I never set out with the film program to say, okay, we need to hit X percentage this, X percentage that. It was just this is the vision of the program. I went at the end of the first year and actually just myself tallied, and it was equitable. White men filmmakers were still in the mix, but now it was actually equitable. And that was without a that.
Because of the other people being let in, it really allows the cream to rise to the top.
Exactly. So it was a strong program. It was an equitable program. And like I said, I never set a quota. It was just,
That's amazing.
this is what's the vision is.
So maybe in the future, as a viewer for anything, I won't have to leave a film or a theater or anything and say, "Who greenlit this shit?"
Well, I think that's the struggle right now. People are like, "Oh, folks are so slow to come back to the cinemas." And I think part of it is we haven't hit the point yet where we haven't found the film yet that's going to draw people back. It's not Black Panther 2. I mean, I think we were hopeful, but I think folks want something and different. And I'm really excited for when the artists start pushing that forward and the industry responds, right?
Yeah. Well, it could be Black Panther 3 because I did see Black Panther 2 and I knew that 75% in they were waiting, they were hooking me in for number
Yeah,
3.
exactly. Oh no, that franchise is not done.
No, it's totally not done. But yes, I mean, I agree with you. There's so many films I want to see, and Tar in particular. I see that I could see it at home, but there's no way I'm going to watch a film of that magnitude
Yeah,
on my couch.
no. There's
Right.
certain things that make sense for your house, and there are other things that you want to see and with other people because that's a big
Right.
part of it. It's not just the screen and the sound; those are important, but sometimes you want to experience something with others because that also kind of, for me at least, shapes my perception of the film.
100%. And
Yeah,
your conversation. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, the one thing that's amazing about New York is like, regardless of BAM being a leader in the city and certainly a beacon of light for Brooklyn, is that there's so many films being shown all over the city that you just can't have that kind of experience in any other town.
no, we're very much a movie going town. And we see that in terms of the numbers. I mean, New York, the attendance is down, but it's not as down as it is in other parts of the country. And
Yeah.
I think a part of that is older audiences are been a little slow to come back.
Hmm. Which you mostly see at theater.
Exactly. But we just finished our Next Wave season, all live performances, uh, operas, dance, theater, and every show I went to was full.
That's fantastic news.
And it was a mixture of it was very intergenerational. Older audiences that came, they might still wear their mask if that's how they feel more comfortable. But I
Totally.
was really, really surprised. And again, I know a lot of folks are struggling, and we are in different ways, but I was really happy to see people in live performance and just huge numbers.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're still creeping out there
Yeah,
very slowly, but
yeah,
we're there. We're there.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Big fan of BAM, and I'm looking forward to going there in the new year and seeing what you got going on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And thanks so much for having me on.
That's great. Take care.